Hello and welcome to another edition of PPAG Perspectives, where members of our team will give key insights into important topics facing organizations today. My name is Norris Clark. I'm managing partner of Princeton Strategic Communications, and I'll be your host. Our topic today is crisis communications, and we'll be talking about preparing your organization for a crisis and how to communicate when a crisis does hit your company or organization. And with us today are three members of our team who are experts in this area. We have David Klusik, Natasha Allegarrison, and Rick Alcantara. So the first question goes out to you, Rick. How do you see the landscape of crisis communications today?
Norris, it's constantly changing. I think because of technology, changes in media, evolving public attitudes about business and institutions, and a lot of other factors. So it's a very dynamic landscape. A recent study tracked trends in the types and frequency of crisis all across various sectors. And not surprisingly, the pandemic largely defined or shaped some of the most significant crises over the last year. Hospitals, nursing homes, public health agencies, schools, and business closures come to mind. At the same time, certain categories like ransomware and cybersecurity show the biggest increases in frequency and magnitude. And of course, product recalls, environmental issues, mismanagement, executive turnover, they're all in the mix. And as always, natural disasters, they hit very hard.
So Rick, could you remind us of some of the best known crises that we've encountered?
Recently, cyber and ransomware crises occurred with T-Mobile and Colonial Pipeline. You probably remember those. Equifax also endured a cyber crisis a couple of years ago. The auto industry is facing crises with self-driving technology, vehicle recalls, part shortages. Bayer has the Roundup herbicide controversy, and Johnson & Johnson no longer sells talcum powder. And everyone, of course, remembers BP's 2010 Deepwater Horizon oil spill in the Gulf. The list just goes on and on. And of course, natural disasters like tornadoes, flooding, and hurricanes like Superstorm Sandy, they pull many organizations into their wake, often powerless to predict or even avoid the damage. These are especially difficult, even in storm-prone areas where people know the risks. Short of these natural and international crises, there are many others that don't make national news, but they still have huge impacts on, affected organizations. And sometimes they're unsuspecting customers, neighbors, investors, or other stakeholders.
So Natasha, as a former reporter, how would you say a reporter looks at a crisis?
We know crises make news. They make headlines. And beyond the sensational or breaking news aspect and element, there's especially the search for a cause, the why. In a crisis, reporters will look to tell stories about victims, bystanders, and experts. And they will look inevitably for a culprit or what's to blame, someone or something to blame, and a hero who might come to that rescue.
Well, that does sound like a traditional formula for a news story. And as we know, a crisis is always part of a good news story.
Reporters are trained to ask the who, what, when, where, why, and how. And it's all in an effort to get to the truth. And they need to gather all that information, make it interesting, and turn it around faster than ever for print mediums, video, digital, and social media channels. So it's multitasking, and it's taken to a whole nother level. And most people will never really get to see what goes into a story, what it takes to produce a feature. It's a lot of work. There's not much time to get it right. And a lot of people are watching. So reporters generally want to get it right. And in a crisis, it's in everyone's interest to help and be proactive in that process by providing accurate and timely information that's easy to understand. The organization in crisis should and can be a go-to source for reporters. And guess what? If reporters don't get that information from you, the reliable and timely information that you can provide, they will look elsewhere. And so that takes the story away from you, and it can be told from someone else's viewpoint. And it might not be flattering, and it might not be that accurate. So it's in everyone's best interest to be a good source for reporters to go to in a crisis.
So David, what does this mean for businesses, for nonprofits, for governments and other organizations?
It means that preparation is key. In today's fast-paced world, you've either lived through a crisis or you haven't been around very long. Fortunately, organizations can do a lot to prepare and to be ready. Organizations that can anticipate and manage crises can survive them, perhaps with fairly little lasting damage. Of course, those that can't manage and can't communicate could incur significant long-term damage to their markets, to their facilities, to their balance sheet, and to their reputation.
So how should organizational leaders prepare for this?
First step might be a little bit obvious, but it's really important, and that's to recognize that a crisis can happen, and it can happen to you, often when you least expect it, and maybe in a very unlikely scenario. In fact, some of the worst cases have arisen from a series of very unlikely events, but they happened. Of course, the second step is to honestly estimate the worst case risks and the most likely risks and their impacts. Keep in mind that the worst case and the most likely case are two very different scenarios. Then I would say third, again, maybe it's obvious, but third would be the most important, and that's have a plan. Write it down, spell it out, assign key roles. Who's in charge? Who fixes the problem? Who's going to be the spokesperson? Who needs to be notified? And how will you recover? These are just a few items for an effective plan.
So then what?
It really boils down to one word: practice. Schedule an exercise with your crisis team, even if it's a short tabletop, kind of an open book exercise, or have a full-blown all-day drill with partners and outside support. No matter the detail, take time to check basics as well as the details like contact information, duty assignments, backup assignments, and systems needs. Create realistic and experience-based scenarios similar to case studies. Next, you should walk through them to validate procedures and responses. In that drill, you can gauge performance for strengths and weaknesses and fix the gaps, and then do it again. Conduct an exercise on a regular basis, whether it's quarterly, maybe once or twice a year, but practice really does improve your performance and sets a serious tone for preparedness. At the same time, don't think that a quick mechanical fix will automatically end the story. How you communicate about the crisis internally and externally can be just as important as how you resolve it. And remember that some of the best managed crises are the ones you've never heard of, because the main players were prepared and communicated effectively about their actions.
So Rick, what can organizations do to prepare for this?
A good place to start is with an assessment of your current crisis communications capability and experience. You should take a look at existing plans in today's context and see if they need updating. Or if you don't have a plan, well, it's never too late to get one. You really just need to get started. So you might take a look at current or potential issues which could lead to a crisis in your organization. Maybe a competitor has faced a similar risk, or maybe you read something that sounds an alarm in your head. It's good to create a file of issue summaries so you know the risks and what you should do if this type of issue were to arise in your world.
I'd like to thank our panelists for their perspective on crisis communications, and I'd like to thank our audience for tuning in to another edition of PPAG Perspectives. Be sure to find us online at ppag.com. Thank you.